The year was 1943. The sky over Europe had become a brutal, unforgiving battlefield, where young men from distant nations fought and died in the cold, thin air. For the crews of the bomber streams, every mission was a descent into hell. Flak turned the atmosphere into a blackened storm of steel. German fighters fell upon them like wolves, their cannon fire tearing through aluminum and flesh with equal ease. The statistics were grim, the odds terrifying. The chance of surviving a full tour of duty was almost zero. It was a brutal, impersonal war of attrition where chivalry seemed a forgotten concept from a bygone era. There was no room for mercy, no place for honor. Or so it seemed. This is the story of that impossibility. The story of a single miraculous moment that defied the very nature of total war. This is the story of the German pilot who saluted his enemy instead of shooting. To understand this moment, we must first understand the man. Franz Stigler was no ordinary pilot. He was a warrior of the clouds, a Luftwaffe ace with 22 victories. To his name, a man whose skill and calmness under fire were legendary within his squadron. But his story in the sky began, long before the war, in the pristine air of pre-war Bavaria. He had learned to fly from a legendary pilot, his own brother August. It was August who first took him into the boundless blue, who taught him not just the mechanics of flight, but its soul. August instilled in him a code, the code of the Knight of the Air, the belief that a true pilot fought with skill and precision, not with spite or brutality, that there was a line, however faint, that one did not cross. This code was later burned into his soul by his squadron commander, the formidable Gustav Rödel. In a stark briefing room, Rödel had looked each of his young pilots in the eye and delivered a command they would never forget. "If I ever hear of any of you shooting a man in a parachute," he said, his voice cold and serious, "I will shoot you myself." It was a stark reminder of honor in the midst of a Nazi war machine that often celebrated ruthlessness. Franz Stigler, a soldier in that machine, clung to this ancient idea like a lifeline. On the other side of the war, in the cramped, noisy cockpit of a B-17 Flying Fortress, was a young man from West Virginia named Charlie Brown. He was just 21 years old, a second lieutenant thrust into a position of immense responsibility. His crew, the 10 men of the bomber nicknamed Olde Pub, were boys themselves. Farm kids from Iowa, mechanics from Chicago, students from New York, all tossed into the meat grinder of the Allied bombing campaign over Europe. Their plane, a massive silver-bodied fortress, was their home, their shield, their fragile metal shell against the unimaginable violence of the high-altitude war. They trusted each other with their lives, a band of brothers bound by shared terror and a desperate hope to survive. December 20th, 1943 dawned cold and gray. The target for the 379th Bomb Group was Bremen, a major German industrial city and one of the most heavily defended targets in the Reich. Its airspace was a known hellscape bristling with hundreds of anti-aircraft guns and patrolled by the deadliest fighter squadrons of the Luftwaffe. Olde Pub took its place in the vast formation, a single silver fish in a great shining school, and turned east toward the continent. The tension inside the plane was a physical presence, thick and cold as the air at 25,000 feet. Then they reached the initial point, the start of the bomb run. The formation straightened, becoming a predictable, slow-moving target. And then the storm broke. The sky around them erupted in black. Flak, bursts, hundreds of them, filled the air with concussive blasts and jagged shrapnel. The plane shuddered violently, metal screaming in protest. A near miss sent a shockwave through the fuselage. Then came the fighters. Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf FW 190s, sleek and lethal, screamed down out of the sun in diving attacks. Their 20mm cannon shells ripped into the B-17's thin skin. A cannon shell exploded near the tail, shredding the left horizontal stabilizer and killing the tail gunner, Sergeant Hugh Eddie Eckenrode, instantly. Another shell tore into the fuselage, destroying the oxygen system and the intercom. A third hit the number 2 engine, which seized immediately, streaming oil and smoke. Shrapnel sliced through the cockpit, wounding the co-pilot, Second Lieutenant Spencer "Pinky" Luke, in his shoulder and leg. The pilot, Charlie Brown, felt a sharp pain in his own arm as a piece of hot metal tore through his flight jacket. The plane pitched and yawed, falling out of formation, a wounded animal separated from the herd. Inside Olde Pub, the scene was one of utter devastation. The air was thick with the acrid smell of cordite smoke and blood. The temperature was 60 degrees below zero, and the Arctic wind screamed through the cannon holes, a torture in itself. The radio was dead. The intercom was dead. They were deaf-mute and gasping for breath in the thin, oxygen-starved air. Charlie Brown, half-deaf from the explosions, his arm bleeding, fought the controls with all his strength. The plane was a wreck. It was losing altitude fast, a sitting duck for any other German fighter that happened by. To turn back toward England now, alone and crippled, was suicide. Their only slim chance, a 1,000-to-1 shot, was to continue east, then turn north and try to reach the neutral coast of Sweden. It was a prayer, a desperate gamble with death. They flew on a ghost ship in the hostile sky, each minute a stolen victory. Meanwhile, at a makeshift German airfield near the coast, Hauptmann Franz Stigler was finished for the day. His mission was over. His Me-109 was being refueled and rearmed by his ground crew. He was tired, the deep fatigue that comes from the constant adrenaline of aerial combat. He was about to head to the mess hall when he heard it, the low, labored, uneven groan of a struggling aircraft. He looked up, shielding his eyes from the weak winter sun, and saw it. A B-17 Flying Fortress. But unlike any he had ever seen. It was crawling across the sky, trailing thick, dark smoke, and a shimmering stream of fuel from its perforated wings. One engine was dead, its propeller feathered. Another was sputtering clearly on its last legs. The tail was a skeleton of torn metal. It was the easiest target he had ever seen. A certain kill, an undeniable victory. He could almost feel the Iron Cross being pinned to his chest. He shouted to his crew, "Quickly refuel my plane!" He scrambled back into the familiar confines of his cockpit. The Daimler-Benz engine roared to life with a powerful, confident growl. He was going up to finish the job. He climbed swiftly, his fighter elegant and lethal as a shark. He positioned himself behind and slightly below the crippled bomber in its blind spot. He moved in for the kill. His thumb hovered over the red trigger button that would unleash his 20mm cannons. One short burst. Less than a second. That was all it would take. The bomber's fuel tanks would ignite, its fragile aluminum frame would disintegrate, and 12 men would vanish in a fireball. He edged closer, his eyes fixed on the target. He was so close now that he could see the details. The shredded skin of the fuselage, the frozen streaks of hydraulic fluid, the jagged holes torn by cannon fire. And then he saw something that made his blood run cold. He saw the human beings inside. Through the gaping holes in the bomber's side, he saw the American crew. He saw them moving slowly, laboriously, like ghosts in the dim interior, tending to their wounded comrades. He saw the blood dark and frozen on their flight suits. He saw the desperation etched on their young faces. He looked at the tail and saw the dead gunner slumped over his guns, a silent testament to the violence they had already endured. This was not a combat aircraft anymore. This was a flying hospital, a hearse. To shoot it down would not be an act of war. It would be murder. It would be a betrayal of every decent thing his brother and Gustav Rodel had ever taught him about honor, about being a pilot, about being a man. Gustav Rodel's voice echoed in his head, clear, as if he were in the cockpit beside him. "I will shoot you myself, the code of the night." In that split second suspended between duty and humanity, Franz Stigler made a choice that would define his life. He took his thumb off the trigger. He would not shoot, but he could not just let them go. He had to do something. He pushed the throttle forward and maneuvered his sleek fighter up alongside the giant bomber's right wingtip. He was so close that the American crew could see his face, could see the black crosses on the wings of his Messerschmitt. A new wave of terror seized the men of Olde Pub. They had seen him. This was it. The German ace had closed in for the point-blank kill shot. The ball turret gunner, his guns frozen and useless, could only stare up in horror. The waist gunners watched helpless, expecting to see the flashes from his cannons. But the flashes never came. Charlie Brown, looking out his window, saw the German pilot. He saw the man's goggles, his leather flight helmet. He saw him looking back, studying his crippled plane. He expected to see the muzzle flash. He expected to die. But the German did not fire. Instead, he did something unbelievable. He made eye contact with Brown. And then, he nodded a slow, deliberate gesture. Franz Stigler then gestured with his gloved hand, pointing down emphatically toward the German soil below. He was telling them to land, to surrender, to save their lives. Charlie Brown understood the gesture perfectly, but he shook his head. Number. He would not land in Germany. He would not become a prisoner of war. He pointed his damaged plane west toward the North Sea, toward home. Stigler understood the refusal. He felt a surge of frustration, but it was mixed with a profound admiration. These boys, these kids, had a courage he respected. A foolish, desperate, magnificent courage. He knew that if he left them now, they were dead. The German coastal anti-aircraft batteries would see this slow, low-flying bomber and blast it from the sky. Or another German pilot, one, without his scruples, would find them and claim the easiest victory of his life. So Franz Stigler made a second, even more impossible decision. He would escort them. He would fly formation with an enemy bomber. He would become their protector. He positioned his Messerschmitt slightly ahead and to the side of the B-17, using his own plane to shield the bomber's most vulnerable underside from the direction of the German coastal defenses. He was their shepherd, a German shepherd leading a wounded American lamb through the valley of the shadow of death. They flew on a bizarre and silent armada, a German fighter and an American bomber, allied against the common enemy of death itself. The crew of Olde Pub watched in stunned, disbelieving silence. The German pilot was not attacking. He was flying close formation. He was hurting them, protecting them. It made no sense. It contradicted every briefing, every newsreel, every ounce of hatred they had been taught to feel for the enemy. It was a miracle, a silent, soaring testament to a shared humanity that transcended the uniforms they wore. For long, tense minutes, the two planes flew together over the snowy landscape of enemy territory, a secret, unspoken truce in the vast open war. As the white-capped waves of the North Sea appeared on the horizon, Stigler knew his role was over. He could go no further. To fly out over the water was to invite attack from Allied patrols or to run out of fuel himself. He had done all he could. He had brought them to the door. He pulled his fighter up close one last time, so close his wingtips seemed to almost touch the bombers. He looked across the void into the cockpit, directly at Charlie Brown. He saw the confusion, the exhaustion, the dawning fragile hope. He brought his right hand up, fingers together, and touched it to the brim of his flight cap. A crisp, formal, and utterly unmistakable salute. A warrior's gesture of respect from one warrior to another. A final recognition of their shared struggle, their shared courage, their shared humanity high above the madness of the world below. Then he banked his Messerschmitt into a steep, graceful turn and disappeared back toward the coast of Germany, leaving the Americans to their fate. The B-17 Olde Pub staggered on. It barely cleared the cliffs of the English coast, its remaining engines coughing and sputtering. It was a flying wreck, a testament to the sheer will of its pilot and crew. Charlie Brown managed a forced landing at the first airfield. He saw the plane skidding to a stop on its last fumes. Its tires shot out, its brakes nearly gone. The crew was safe. They were alive. They had cheated death. But when they stumbled out of the plane and began to tell their story, they were met with skepticism and disbelief. Their debriefing officer, hearing the tale of the saluting German pilot, dismissed it as combat fatigue, a hallucination born of trauma, hypoxia, and terror. The official report was filed away, the incredible incident noted as unreliable testimony. The crew was ordered for the sake of their own credibility and morale never to speak of it again. The story was classified buried in the endless bureaucracy of war, a secret memory carried by 12 weary men. For Franz Stigler, he returned to his base. He said nothing of what had transpired. To admit he had deliberately let an enemy bomber escape would have meant a court-martial for dereliction of duty. In the harsh justice of a war-weary Germany, it could have meant execution. He buried the memory deep within himself, a solitary shining moment of decency in the gathering darkness. He fought on the war, grinding down toward its inevitable bloody conclusion. He survived, but the memory of that B-17 of the young faces inside became a touchstone, a private ember of honor he kept warm in his heart through the long, cold years that followed. For decades, the two men lived parallel lives on opposite sides of the world. Charlie Brown left the military, went to college on the GI Bill, and eventually built a career with the State Department. He married, raised a family, and built a good life. But the war never truly left him. The image of the German pilot, the nod, the escort, the salute, it haunted his quiet moments. Was it real? Had he, in the extremity of his condition, simply imagined a moment of grace? The question gnawed at him, a splinter in his soul that never healed. Franz Stigler, too, left the ruins of post-war Germany behind, emigrating to Canada to start anew. He built a successful business, married, and found peace in his new country. He, too, rarely spoke of the war. The memory of the B-17 was his private treasure, a solitary act for which he hoped there had been a positive outcome. He often wondered if the young American pilot had survived that day. He hoped, with a quiet, persistent desperation, that his impossible gamble with mercy had not been in vain, that the lives he spared had gone on to mean something. 47 years passed. The Cold War rose and fell. The world transformed. But for Charlie Brown, the memory remained sharp and unresolved. In 1990, now retired, he made a decision. He would find the truth. He began a quest, a solitary mission of peace. He wrote letters, dozens of them, to Luftwaffe veteran associations and magazines. He described the date, December 20th, 1943. The location, near the German coast. The unique, crippled state of his B-17. He asked a simple, impossible question. Did anyone know of a German pilot who might have encountered such a bomber and against all odds let it go? Months later, a letter found its way to a home in Vancouver, Canada. The recipient was an elderly German immigrant named Franz Stigler. He opened the letter, his eyes scanning the words. And then his heart stopped. The date, the place, the description of the damaged bomber. It was them. It was his bomber. The boys had lived. They had made it. For 47 years he had carried the hope that his act of humanity had not been wasted, and now here was the confirmation. His hands trembled as he immediately sat down and wrote a letter back. He began with 5 words that would forever bridge the chasm of time and war. I was the one, he wrote. A transcontinental phone call was arranged. 2 old men, their voices now frail with age, connected across a continent. Charlie Brown in Florida. Franz Stigler in Vancouver. "Hello, Franz," Charlie said, his voice trembling with emotion. "This is Charles Brown. I am the pilot of the B-17 you saved." There was a long, profound pause on the line, filled with the static of the years and the weight of memory. Then, Franz's voice, thick with a lifetime of suppressed emotion, replied, "Charles Brown. I have waited for this call for 47 years. They talked for hours that night, the line humming between them. They filled in the gaps of the story, each providing the missing pieces of the other's puzzle. Franz, described seeing the wounded crew through the torn metal, the dead tail gunner that had sealed his decision. Charlie described the sheer terror turning into awe as the German fighter flew alongside them, not as a hunter, but as a guardian. They spoke of their lives after the war, their families, their careers. The wall of enemy and ally of German and American crumbled to dust, revealing the two human beings who had always been there. They were simply two men bound forever by a single, incredible act of shared humanity. Their first meeting in person was at a reunion of the 379th Bomb Group in the early 1990s. The scene in the crowded hotel lobby was one of pure, unscripted emotion. Two old men, one from each side of a world war, saw each other from across the room. They did not walk. They ran. They met in the middle and embraced like long-lost brothers, weeping unashamedly, their shoulders shaking with the release of decades of buried feeling. The room of hardened veterans men who had lived through their own hell fell into a hushed, respectful silence, and then erupted in thunderous, understanding applause. They were witnessing something rare and beautiful, a reconciliation that healed not just two men, but a little piece of the world's broken history. From that day forward, they were inseparable. They became closer than brothers, their bond forged in the crucible of that one moment in 1943. They traveled across North America together, telling their story to anyone who would listen. It was not a story of war, but of peace. Not a story of hatred, but of compassion. They spoke in high school auditoriums, at veterans' halls, on television programs. Their message was simple, powerful, and profound. In the face of overwhelming darkness, you can always choose light. In the heart of conflict, you can always choose humanity. You can always choose honor. Franz would often reflect on the deeper meaning, telling audiences, in war, the pressure is to become animals. But if you can come out of it and still be a human being, you have achieved something greater than any victory. Charlie would look at his friend, his eyes glistening, and add, "Franz saved my life that day, and in a way, I think I saved his too. We gave each other a future and a reason to believe in the good in people." They embarked on a joint research project, a final mission to find the families of every single crew member of Olde Pub, to tell them the full, complete story of how their father, their grandfather, their uncle had truly survived that day. It was during this research that they uncovered a stunning fact. At the time of their encounter, Franz Stigler had needed just 2 more aerial victories to qualify for the Knight's Cross, Germany's highest military award. He had let it go. He had chosen a higher honor, an honor that no medal could ever represent. In their final years, they were often asked the inevitable question, did they consider each other a hero? Both always gave the same selfless answer. Charlie would say, Franz is the hero. He had the power. He had the weapons. He made the choice. Franz would shake his head, a small smile on his face, and counter-number. Charlie is the hero. He got that wreck of a plane and his wounded crew home. That was the real miracle. That took a different kind of courage. Franz Stigler passed away peacefully in March 2008 at the age of 92. Charlie Brown, his soulmate in story, followed him just a few months later in November of the same year. It was as if their souls, having found each other after nearly 5 decades apart, could not bear to be separated again. Their story endures. It stands as a permanent testament, a flicker of unwavering light in the overwhelming darkness of World War II. It reminds us that the lines we draw between nations, between enemies, are often illusions. That a single act of courage, not the courage to destroy, but the courage to show mercy, can echo through the decades. It can bridge oceans of hatred. It can turn sworn enemies into the closest of family. The German pilot who saluted his enemy did more than just spare a crew. In that crisp, formal gesture, he saluted their shared humanity. He affirmed that there are codes of conduct that stand higher than national allegiance, that there are bonds between human beings that are stronger than the commands of any war. In the end, Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown did not just save each other's lives on that December day in 1943. They left behind a story that continues to save a little of our own humanity, reminding us all that even in the very heart of conflict, we always have a choice.